All right, certainly an important moment for us to reflect on. Now, Senzo's passing has brought into sharp focus issues around gun control in South Africa. To reflect on that aspect of the story, let's bring in Sara Chitambo. She's a spokesperson for Gun-Free South Africa. Sara, thanks for your time. Welcome to the AM report. Let me start by plainly asking, to what extent do you think South Africa has a gun problem?
Thanks so much for having us. And I think what Senzo's murder brings into focus with South Africa is just how big a problem we do have with gun violence. Every single day in South Africa, 23 people are killed by guns. And anywhere else in the world, this would be deemed as a crisis. That's a taxi load full of people every single day that die because of guns. So we do think that guns are a big problem. We can see with the murder of Colonel Kania a few weeks ago. We saw with the murder of the two women in Limpopo. We know that guns are the leading cause of murder and are being used in assassinations daily. And guns have also overtaken knives as the leading cause of murder. And we see this in the crime stats that were released by the South African Police Services a few months ago, that in Gauteng, more people are shot than die in car accidents. And we know that car accidents are a big problem. So if there's a problem that's bigger than car accidents in terms of murdering people or killing people, we know that it's a big problem.
Absolutely. My understanding is that there was some kind of intervention between 2000 and 2010 where it appears that government had tried to take this a bit seriously. What went wrong from that moment? Did that intervention work?
Yes. What happened in the year 2000 is the Firearms Control Act came into play. So we saw a lot of amnesties. And amnesty is where government and the police department do stop and seizure measures and bring in measures to remove impunity against people who are bringing in guns or surrendering weapons, and more operations and stint operations and acting on intelligence in terms of being able to bring in guns from places such as the Cape Flats, and also stop gun proliferation through fraud and corruption of the police department itself. So that was very strictly enforced. From the year 2000 to 2010, we saw a decrease of gun violence. We saw a decrease in terms of the guns that were actually circulating. So we know that the less guns are in circulation and the more controls are put into place, the less gun theft we do see. So there has been a bit of a lax in terms of enforcing the Firearms Control Act, and now we've seen an increase in terms of how many guns are actually in circulation, how many guns are actually being used for murder, for criminal activity, etc. So we do need more checks and balances to be brought back by the police department in terms of ensuring stricter regulations and control of the Firearms Control Act to see our numbers declining and getting back to where they used to be in the year 2000 to 2010. So we know that it works. We know that when there is stricter regulations, when there is stricter enforcement, that we do see the trends changing. So we need the SAPS to really urgently bring back those measures that help to reduce the circulation of guns.
Yeah, it sounds to me like yet another instance of having great laws in our country, but being very poor at implementing those laws. Would you say that also is the reality when it comes to gun-related violence in South Africa?
We really do think that on paper it looks good, and like you said, that is the trend with a lot of things in our constitution and a lot of things in the way that we fail to actually implement these beautiful laws and beautiful practices that are on paper. We do need stricter control. We do need the police to act in terms of being able to have stricter regulations, have capacity buildings to implement the implementation of the Firearms Control Act, including appointing and training new staff and acquiring new equipment that can increase their ability to act on intel, and also their ability to really address illegal guns and criminal guns. And also really in terms of awareness raising, we do need to see that there's a current amnesty that is running at the moment. It's a firearms control amnesty that started in August and is running up until the 31st of January next year. But you don't see anything about it. You don't hear SAPS speaking about it. You don't hear them giving us information in terms of reporting how many guns they're actually able to recover. So we know that Amnesty gives people indemnity against prosecution for unlawful possession of firearms and ammunition. And if more people know that they can bring these in, or they can tip the police off in terms of how they can act on these, that we can see better regulation and better numbers and trends to do with gun violence.
Yeah, you've already mentioned Shalkania, a top cop in the Western Cape, who's just one of, I guess, thousands of victims who have died at the hand of a gun, or, because of gunmen and gun violence. What we know about Shalkania is that he was also at the cusp of cracking a case to do with the firearms registry, where we were told it was going to be revealed that police officers are working in cahoots with criminals to distribute guns in South Africa. Are we doing enough to pay attention to how much of an inside job some of the violence we're seeing actually is? And does it really matter that you have a guns amnesty when you're not addressing that aspect of the problem with as equal amount of vigor?
Exactly. We know that, the case with Konokania and many others who have been at the crux of being able to break these intercept these, the fraud and corruption that does happen within the police force. We've seen in the past with Prinsloo, there's a policeman called Prinsloo in 2016. He was responsible for leaking at least 2,500 guns into the arms of gang leaders, and we know that through police ballistics that these guns are responsible for the killing of innocent people in the Western Cape. As many as 89 children have been killed with guns that were leaked from the police force. So fraud and corruption in the police force is a big problem. We know that there is ongoing trials, there are ongoing investigations into the police force themselves to be able to really shed light in terms of how do guns come out of police stockpiles and end up in the streets and end up for criminal activity. So these are very important investigations that are happening, and we hope that we can actually prosecute and arrest the people who are responsible for that, so that we can turn the trend in terms of guns ending up on the streets and in homes and in illegal arms.
Yeah. And Sarah, when we speak facts and figures, do we have an idea of how many guns are in the country's streets illegally as we speak? I mean, essentially, I'm trying to get a hold of, do we have a handle on the extent of this problem, or, are we just getting a sense of it from incidents like the killing of Shalkania and many others, including Senzo Meyiwa's murder?
Yeah, we actually do not know how many unlicensed guns are in South Africa. So the lack of data is very worrying. We know that most unlicensed guns were once legal before being leaked into the illegal pool. And like I mentioned earlier, they go in there because of fraud and corruption. Other ways in which they go in there are loss and theft. That's the most significant mechanisms where civilians and not the police are the biggest source of illegal guns in South Africa. And they lose about 7 times more guns than the police force themselves. And of course, there's cross-border trafficking. We know that contrary to most common perceptions about illegal guns coming into the country, it's actually most that handguns are particularly trafficked from South Africa going outwards. So the issue that we do not know how many illegal guns are actually in circulations is a big problem, and that's something that SAPS needs to look into quite urgently.
Yeah, and I guess that kind of bleeds into my next question. What does action look like? I know Guns Free South Africa is calling for action for police to clamp down on the issue. Speak to us practically about where one even begins for what appears to be a really complex and involved issue.
Guns are really highly prized by criminals. We know that from the amount of guns that are lost to theft every single day. So for us, it's really the implementation of the Firearms Control Act in terms of being able to license properly who owns guns in South Africa, how many guns do they own, and for what purposes, okay? And in terms of instilling and enforcing the Firearms Control Act properly, we also need to look at the caliber of guns that are in circulation. What kind of people are allowed to use guns? Is it just security forces? Why do civilians own guns, and for what purposes? And also really looking into the matter of fraud and corruption within the police force. How do we ensure that when we seize guns and when guns are surrendered to the police force, they are immediately destroyed and they are immediately registered and ballistics are done to trace the history of these guns so that we know where they come from and that we can follow up on other incidents that they may have been involved in. So for us, it really is a stricter enforcement of the Firearms Control Act by SFPS to ensure that there are less guns in circulation. And we know that when less guns are in circulation, there is less deaths by guns.
Absolutely. Now, of course, the backdrop of our conversation this morning is that it's exactly 6 years since Meyiwa was killed, also through a gun that I imagine is in circulation illegally. What we also know from some reports is that that weapon was used to also commit other crimes. And I imagine we shouldn't be surprised because this is part of the issue. When a gun is not being used legally, it's almost impossible to kind of wrap your head around the possible carnage that it can cause. In this instance, Meyiwa's life was lost, but I guess a whole lot more could be done with that gun.
Absolutely. We know that because of the lifespan of a gun, it can be used multiple times to, inflict pain, to maim, and also to lethally kill somebody. It is a fatal weapon, and that is the irreversibility and lethality of a gun. And why we really are against the use of guns is because, it's just so sad. I mean, the nation lost a hero, the family lost the father and the son, and subsequently Senzo's own father died a few years later with a broken heart, really, of not having seen justice in terms of seeing the person who killed him arrested. So really, we urge the police to act on intelligence, to speak to witnesses when matters arise, and ensure that they can act on intelligence to act quickly and solve investigations in a timeliest manner, because the facts are there are leads that they could have followed, and we're just happy that we are moving towards somewhere where they can actually be able to tell us who the people who did this are and bring justice to Senzo's death.
Absolutely. Sara Chitambo is the spokesperson for Gun Free South Africa. Sarah, thanks very much indeed for your time.